I often find myself reflecting on how it all began, the day I met Michelle, the spark that ignited our love, and the dreams we wove together like threads in a beautiful tapestry. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I first laid eyes on her at that little coffee shop down the street from my apartment. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air, but nothing compared to the warmth that radiated from her smile. She was sitting by the window, absorbed in a book, her golden hair catching the sunlight just right, creating a halo around her. I still remember how she looked up and met my gaze, a hint of curiosity dancing in her deep brown eyes. From that moment on, it was as if the world around us faded into the background. We began talking, and I was instantly captivated by her intelligence, her laughter, and her passion for life. We spent hours discussing everything from our favorite authors to our dreams for the future. Michelle had this infectious enthusiasm that drew people in, and I was no exception. I could see the glimmer of ambition in her eyes, a determination to make something of herself. It was inspiring and made me want to be a better person, to match her drive. As we got to know each other, I learned about her aspirations to become a graphic designer. She had an incredible talent for bringing ideas to life through art, and I admired her dedication to honing her craft. We spent countless evenings sketching ideas together, brainstorming projects that would allow her to showcase her talent. Our creative sessions often turned into late-night talks about our dreams, fears, and everything in between. It was during those moments that I realized how lucky I was to have her in my life. We fell in love quickly, but it was a love built on mutual respect and understanding. I valued her for who she was, not just as my girlfriend, but as a partner. We supported each other through challenges, her late nights studying for design competitions, and my endless work hours as I climbed the corporate ladder. I always admired how she balanced her time, working tirelessly while still managing to bring joy into our lives. Michelle was a rock. Her unwavering support made me believe I could achieve anything. In our journey together, we painted a picture of a life filled with shared goals. We dreamed of traveling the world, exploring new cultures, and immersing ourselves in experiences that would broaden our perspectives. We talked about starting a family, building a home filled with laughter, and sharing our passions with the next generation. The thought of growing old together and reminiscing about our adventures filled me with a sense of warmth and contentment. I never once doubted her loyalty. To me, Michelle embodied fidelity. She was the kind of person who believed in commitment, in nurturing the bonds we had forged. I often marveled at how she would go out of her way to make me feel special, leaving little notes around the house or planning surprise date nights to keep the spark alive. Those small gestures spoke volumes about her character. I felt safe with her, secure in the knowledge that we were building something beautiful together. Little did I know, that sense of security would soon be shattered. But in those early days, as I reveled in our love, I could never have imagined the storm that was brewing just beneath the surface. Looking back, I realize how blissfully unaware I was, wrapped in the cocoon of our shared dreams and the deep affection I had for her. The world felt bright, and our future seemed limitless. But life has a way of introducing unexpected twists, and it was only a matter of time before everything changed. As the weeks turned into months, I began to sense an unsettling shift in our relationship. It started subtly, like a whisper carried on the wind, but soon it became impossible to ignore. Michelle, the vibrant woman I had fallen in love with, seemed to be slipping away from me. At first, I attributed it to the demands of her job. The design firm she worked for was growing, and with that came increased pressure. I wanted to be supportive, to encourage her as she poured herself into her work. After all, her dreams were my dreams too. But the more I tried to understand, the more I felt like an outsider in her life. The first sign of trouble was her increasing absence. There were nights when she would come home late, the excuse often revolving around a last-minute project or an important client meeting. I remember the first time it happened, I had planned a cozy dinner, complete with her favorite pasta and a bottle of wine. I set the table, lit candles, and eagerly awaited her return. As the clock ticked past 8, then 9, a familiar knot of worry began to tighten in my stomach. When she finally walked through the door, her face was a mixture of exhaustion and distraction. The warmth of our home seemed to wash over her, yet her mind appeared to be miles away. "Sorry, I lost track of time," she said, brushing her hair back as she plopped down on the couch beside me. I could see the faint glow of her phone in her hand, a notification lighting up the screen. I tried to ignore the slight pang of jealousy that accompanied my thoughts, reminding myself that she was simply busy with work. But as the weeks passed, those late nights became a routine. I found myself growing increasingly uneasy, wrestling with the feeling that something was off. Michelle also started to withdraw emotionally. Our late-night talks, once filled with laughter and dreams, were replaced with distracted conversations. She would nod along to my stories, her eyes often drifting to her phone or the TV, and I began to feel as if I were speaking to a ghost of the woman I loved. The intimacy we once shared, those deep connections that made our relationship so special, felt strained. It was as if a wall had gone up between us, and I couldn't figure out how to break it down. I tried to engage her, to draw her out of the fog that seemed to envelop her. "How was your day?" I would ask, hoping to spark a conversation, but her responses became vague, more focused on surface details than on the emotions behind her experiences. "Oh, it was fine, just busy." I could feel frustration bubbling beneath the surface, but I pushed it down, convincing myself that she was simply overwhelmed. Perhaps I was overthinking things, looking for problems that didn't exist. Another peculiar change was her newfound interest in her appearance. Michelle had always been beautiful, but now she was spending extra time getting ready for work, choosing outfits that seemed more stylish than usual, and wearing makeup more often. I couldn't help but notice the small changes, a new perfume that lingered in the air, an expensive handbag that she'd never mentioned buying. It was as if she was trying to impress someone, but who? The thought nagged at me, stirring a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. Then there were the secretive phone calls. She'd step out to take them, her voice hushed and clipped, and when she returned, she would avoid eye contact. The simple act of her holding the phone away from me, as if to protect some secret, ignited my imagination. I tried to dismiss these thoughts as paranoia, the product of my insecurities, but each instance added another layer of doubt to my already fragile state of mind. Finally, it reached a boiling point when she outright avoided discussing her plans. We had made a habit of sharing our schedules and mapping out our weekends together, and yet now, when I asked about her upcoming week, she would deflect. "Oh, nothing much," she would say, her eyes darting away as if searching for an escape route. It was as if she was living a double life, one I was no longer a part of. The distance between us felt insurmountable, and I couldn't help but wonder if my fears were justified. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. What if she was seeing someone else? The very thought sent a chill down my spine. I had always believed in our love, in the bond we had built, but now I was left questioning everything. The warmth and safety I had once felt were being replaced by an icy sense of dread. I knew I had to confront her, to dig deeper and find out what was going on, but a part of me feared what I might discover. And so I waited, caught in the limbo of love and suspicion, desperately hoping for the truth to reveal itself before it was too late. The gnawing feeling of doubt had morphed into an unbearable weight on my chest, and I knew I could no longer sit idly by, hoping the truth would simply reveal itself. I had to take matters into my own hands, to confront the possibility that the love of my life might not be the person I thought she was. The mere thought of betrayal sent shivers down my spine, but I couldn't shake the need to know for certain. I decided to observe her. It felt wrong, invasive even, but desperation clouded my judgment. I began by tracking her movements, marking the days when she returned home late or avoided discussing her plans. With each passing day, my resolve strengthened, fueled by a cocktail of suspicion and fear. I needed proof, something tangible to either ease my worries or confirm my worst fears. One evening, I took a deep breath and followed her after work. I watched as she drove away from the office, my heart racing with a mix of anxiety and determination. I kept my distance, ensuring she wouldn't notice my presence. The drive felt eternal, each red light stretching into an agonizing wait as I fought against the urge to turn back. But I pressed on, guided by a twisted sense of hope and dread. Eventually, she parked outside an upscale restaurant I had never seen her mention before. My heart began to pound, each thud echoing in my ears like a warning bell. I found a discreet spot across the street, hidden behind a large tree, and watched as she stepped out of the car. She looked beautiful, radiant even, her hair flowing elegantly down her back, a dress hugging her figure in all the right places. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of admiration, but it quickly extinguished under the weight of my growing unease. As I sat there, I watched her enter the restaurant, and my heart sank further. Minutes later, a tall man, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, approached her. My breath hitched in my throat as I recognized him. He was a wealthy businessman known in our city, a man with a reputation for charm and connections. They exchanged a few words before entering the restaurant together, the door closing behind them like a curtain falling on my world. Every rational thought fled my mind. I was frozen in place, grappling with the reality that the woman I loved was inside, sharing laughter and intimate moments with another man. My pulse quickened, the cold grip of betrayal tightening around my heart. I felt like a voyeur, an unwitting participant in a drama I had never wanted to be part of. The weight of disbelief washed over me, and I fought against the tears threatening to spill over. I wanted to convince myself it was a misunderstanding, that maybe they were just business associates, but deep down, I knew better. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged from the restaurant, their faces lit up with smiles that pierced my heart like daggers. She leaned in closer to him, her laughter ringing out like a cruel taunt. I felt rage boil within me, churning like a storm on the horizon. My entire being ached with the realization that the woman I cherished, who had once promised to share her life with me, was now entwined with someone else. When they hugged goodbye, a lingering touch that spoke of familiarity and warmth, I could no longer contain the torrent of emotions raging inside me. I was shattered. The memories of our happy moments flooded my mind, filling me with anguish. How could she do this? I replayed our life together, the dreams we shared, the plans we had made, and suddenly they felt hollow and meaningless. All those late-night conversations, the intimate moments of vulnerability and love, were they all just a facade? I felt utterly betrayed, not just by her, but by the life we had built together. The warmth of our shared memories turned to ash in my mouth as the reality of her disloyalty settled over me. I remembered the first time we danced together, how she had looked into my eyes with such sincerity. I thought we were a team, partners against the world. But now here she was, laughing and flirting with another man as if everything we shared meant nothing. My world, once filled with love and hope, crumbled around me. Each heartbeat felt like a reminder of the life I had lost. The anger surged within me, threatening to overtake my reason. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but a voice inside me warned against acting rashly. I was shattered and furious, but I needed to gather my thoughts, to strategize. This betrayal demanded more than just an emotional reaction. It required a plan to reclaim my life and the respect I once had for our relationship. In the days that followed my discovery, I found myself in a whirlwind of emotions: shock, anger, and profound sadness battling for dominance within me. Yet beneath the chaos, a fierce determination began to take shape. I was done being a victim in this twisted scenario. I needed to reclaim control over my life, and the only way to do that was to confront the man who had invaded it so ruthlessly. The thought of revenge ignited a fire within me, a desire not just to retaliate, but to restore my sense of dignity. I had connections in the business world, ties that could be wielded like weapons against my wife's lover. Over the years, I had cultivated relationships with influential people, from suppliers to investors, each of whom trusted me and my judgment. My mind raced with possibilities as I contemplated how to leverage these connections to dismantle his life piece by piece. This wasn't merely about vengeance. It was about regaining the power that had been stripped from me. I began by researching him, his business, his partnerships, and any weaknesses I could exploit. His company was known for its high-profile clients and lucrative contracts, but I learned there were underlying issues, from financial instability to strained relationships with key partners. It was time to bring those cracks to the surface. I carefully mapped out a plan, analyzing every detail and preparing myself for the meticulous execution of my strategy. First, I reached out to a few trusted contacts who had once expressed discontent with him, whispering about his questionable business practices. I crafted an anonymous tip that highlighted potential legal violations in his company. I knew how quickly news traveled in the business community, and I could almost hear the wheels of distrust beginning to turn. This initial step would set the stage for what was to come, sowing seeds of doubt among his partners and clients. Next, I leveraged my position to influence key players within his industry. I reached out to a couple of influential figures, discussing their concerns about his leadership style and management decisions. I framed the conversation in a way that made it appear as though I was looking out for their best interests, subtly leading them to question whether aligning with him was truly wise. I aimed to isolate him, to make him vulnerable as the walls began to close in around him. With every move I made, I felt a surge of empowerment. It was exhilarating to reclaim agency over my life, even if it was through revenge. I remembered how Michel had always spoken about his charm, how he dazzled people with his charisma. Now I was determined to show everyone the other side of that charm, the side that could be ruthless, manipulative, and ultimately destructive. I decided to take it a step further by gathering evidence of any wrongdoings. I called in favors from a few contacts who specialized in corporate investigations. I wanted to build a solid case against him, something that would not only damage his reputation but also threaten his financial standing. It felt cold and calculated, but with each passing day I was less focused on morality and more consumed by the need for retribution. I was stepping into a role I never thought I'd take on, but the desire to expose him outweighed any remaining sentimentality. As my plan began to take shape, I also reflected on the impact this would have on Michel. Would she suffer as a result of my actions? In the beginning, it felt like a necessary evil. She had made her choice, and it was time for her to experience the consequences of her betrayal. I envisioned the look on her face when she realized her lover was not the invincible man he portrayed himself to be. This was more than just a revenge plot. It was about revealing the truth about her decision to abandon our love for someone who might not even be worth her time. I would not only ruin his business, but also dismantle the illusion he had built. I would make him regret the day he crossed paths with Michel. I was no longer the helpless husband watching his world crumble. I was the architect of his downfall. The sense of control was intoxicating, providing a temporary balm for the wounds inflicted by her infidelity. I steeled myself for the upcoming battle, knowing that while I was crafting this revenge, I was also reclaiming my identity. This was not just an act of malice, it was a means of healing, a way to confront the pain and betrayal I had endured. In my mind, it was justifiable, a necessary response to an unbearable situation. I knew I was treading a dangerous path, but as I set my plans in motion, the thrill of retribution eclipsed any lingering doubts. I was ready to unleash my carefully constructed revenge, and I wouldn't stop until I had dismantled his life, just as he had dismantled my trust. With my plan for revenge set in motion, I dove headfirst into dismantling the empire he had built, brick by brick, partnership by partnership. I knew that to inflict the maximum damage on him, I needed to act strategically, carefully orchestrating a series of events that would undermine his reputation and destabilize his business. I started by feeding information to a couple of industry insiders, contacts who were already skeptical of him due to his abrasive demeanor. I crafted a narrative that painted him as untrustworthy, emphasizing whispers of shady dealings and questionable ethics. "Have you heard about his latest contract?" I would ask casually, letting the words hang in the air like a dark cloud. "Seems like he's been cutting corners. I wouldn't be surprised if he's hiding something." As I spoke, I watched their expressions closely, noting the flicker of doubt in their eyes. It was gratifying to see how easily the seeds of distrust took root. One by one, they began to question their business relationships with him. The more I fed them, the more they churned the information among themselves, like a rumor mill gone wild. I made sure my name stayed out of it, playing the part of a concerned industry peer, looking out for their best interests. The first real victory came when one of his key clients, a well-known tech company, decided to pull their contract after hearing about his alleged ethical breaches. I had positioned it as a precautionary measure, hinting that they might be better off with a more reputable partner. Their decision sent shockwaves through his organization. I could almost hear the panic setting in as I imagined him scrambling to hold everything together, his facade cracking under the pressure. As I continued to work behind the scenes, I also kept a close eye on Michel. I noticed subtle changes in her demeanor as the financial troubles began to pile up around her lover. The late-night texts that used to flow so freely started to dwindle, replaced by an awkward silence whenever she came home after spending time with him. She would come back, her expression guarded, as if she were trying to mask a reality that was unfolding. I knew that the charm he once exuded was beginning to falter as the walls closed in around him. I remember one evening vividly. Michelle came home looking troubled, her brow furrowed as she set her bag down with a heavy sigh. "Everything okay?" I asked, feigning innocence while masking my eagerness to know more. She hesitated, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of doubt cross her face. "It's just, things are a bit complicated with work. You know how it is." I pressed a little more, curiosity piquing my interest. "What do you mean, is he okay?" Her hesitation spoke volumes, and I felt a surge of satisfaction knowing that my plan was working. She finally replied, "He's going through a tough time financially. I'm sure he'll bounce back." But the uncertainty in her voice was unmistakable. I knew she was starting to question her decision, the initial allure of his wealth and charm dimming in the face of reality. I watched as she began to pull away from him emotionally, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of vindication. She had invested so much into this relationship, and now, as the cracks widened, I could see her losing interest. I was still in pain, still grappling with the betrayal, but I also felt empowered. Watching as the consequences of her choices unfolded, I continued my campaign, subtly sabotaging his relationships with other partners. I approached those who were on the fence about working with him, planting seeds of doubt, and before long, his financial stability began to unravel. Contracts were lost, partnerships dissolved, and rumors spread like wildfire. It was as if I were orchestrating a symphony of destruction, each note resonating with the sweet sound of retribution. As I watched Michelle's interactions with him change, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me reveled in her discomfort, the realization that the man she had chosen over me was crumbling before her eyes. Yet, another part of me felt a pang of sympathy. She had once been my everything, and I couldn't deny that seeing her suffer, even indirectly, brought with it a shadow of sadness. But I had made my choice. My focus was on the path ahead. The more he faltered, the more Michelle began to question her infatuation. I could see her weighing her options, assessing whether this relationship was worth the turmoil that was now encircling them both. The sparkle in her eyes that once ignited my soul was dimming, and I could feel the tide turning. I knew that eventually, she would realize that the life she had pursued was built on a shaky foundation. I was relentless in my pursuit, not just for revenge, but for closure. I wanted her to see the truth, that love built on deception was bound to crumble. With every blow I struck against him, I felt the grip of control tightening around my life once more. I had turned the tables, and now it was only a matter of time before the reality of his downfall seeped into every aspect of their relationship. I was the puppet master pulling the strings, and as I set my plan into motion, I could hardly contain the anticipation of witnessing the final act of this tragic play. As my plan unfolded, the consequences for Michelle's lover became increasingly evident. He was spiraling, caught in a web of financial troubles and social ostracism, and it was fascinating and gratifying to witness his descent into desperation. The confident businessman I had once watched charm his way through life now seemed to fade, replaced by a man grappling with the ruins of his crumbling empire. I felt a strange sense of power as the pieces fell into place, each day bringing new evidence of his unraveling. With every lost client and every failed business deal, his status in the community began to erode. Rumors of his unethical practices circulated like wildfire, whispered in the hallways of corporate offices, and echoed in the cafes where the city's elite gathered. It wasn't long before he became a figure of ridicule among his peers. The same connections he once relied on for support now viewed him with suspicion, their trust shattered by the seeds of doubt I had planted. I could see the toll this was taking on him. The once dapper businessman who had strutted through life with an air of invincibility now appeared disheveled and worn. His tailored suits hung on him loosely, and the confident smile that used to light up his face had vanished, replaced by a permanent frown etched with worry. I watched from a distance, my heart pounding with a mix of satisfaction and something darker. At the same time, I observed the impact this chaos had on Michelle. The initial allure of her relationship with him had been predicated on his charm and success. As those qualities began to crumble, so did her infatuation. I could see her internal struggle play out in subtle shifts in her demeanor. When they were together, the conversations that once sparkled with excitement turned strained and uncomfortable. She would roll her eyes when he rambled about his problems, and her patience grew thin as his desperation mounted. One evening, I witnessed a particularly telling moment. I had arranged for a chance encounter at a mutual friend's gathering, knowing they would both be there. As I walked into the room, I spotted them in a corner, the atmosphere thick with tension. He was attempting to engage her in conversation, but I could see that she was distant, her expression betraying her disinterest. His voice was tinged with frustration as he tried to regain her attention, but it was clear he was struggling. "Things are just a bit rough right now," he said, his tone desperate as if searching for sympathy. "But I'll get back on my feet. You know I always do." Michelle shrugged, her eyes darting away as if seeking an escape. "I hope so," she replied curtly, her voice lacking conviction. The flicker of concern that had once danced in her eyes was now extinguished, replaced by impatience. I could see that she was beginning to lose faith in him, realizing that his charm had only masked a deeper insecurity. As the night wore on, the other guests began to notice the shift in dynamics. Conversations shifted from admiration for his success to hushed tones about his failures. I overheard snippets of conversation that cut deep, like blades aimed at his already fragile ego. "Did you hear about his company? I can't believe he let it come to this," one person remarked, their voice dripping with disdain. Each barb seemed to chip away at his already dwindling confidence. I watched him cling to Michelle, trying to draw strength from her presence as if she were his last lifeline. It was a stark contrast to the confident businessman who had wooed her with promises of a lavish lifestyle. Now, he was almost pitiful, relying on her for emotional support while struggling to maintain the facade of his former self. As his situation worsened, I saw a subtle shift in their interactions. Michelle, once enchanted by his charm, began to take on a caretaker role, trying to support him through his difficulties. She would listen to his rants, offering consolation, but her heart wasn't in it. I could see the frustration boiling beneath the surface, and a part of me relished the sight. He was becoming dependent on her in a way he had never intended, and with each day that passed, I felt her resolve to stay with him waver. At times, I caught glimpses of their conversations through the window of their shared moments. They would argue over small things, the tension between them palpable. "I can't keep doing this, you know," she would say, her voice strained. "I didn't sign up for this." The desperation in his eyes would deepen, and I could sense him grappling with the realization that he was losing her. In those moments, I felt a rush of vindication. The imbalance of power had shifted. Once the man with everything, he was now desperately clinging to a relationship that was unraveling before his eyes. His financial ruin had become a reflection of his personal life, and as he descended deeper into his struggles, I knew it was only a matter of time before Michelle would reach her breaking point. With every lost opportunity and every derisive comment from his peers, I could feel the threads of their relationship fraying further. He was becoming increasingly desperate, trying to reassure her that everything would be okay, but the sincerity in his words had faded, overshadowed by the reality of his situation. I was watching his downfall unfold, and with each passing day, my resolve solidified. I would see this through to the end, ready to witness the final collapse of their relationship, a spectacle I had orchestrated with precision. I knew that in time, the consequences of his choices would come crashing down, and I would be there to savor the moment when he lost everything, her included. The day finally arrived when the facade shattered and the truth became undeniable. I had been waiting for this moment, the culmination of my meticulous plan, and as I prepared for her return home, a strange mix of anticipation and dread filled the air. I was no longer merely a spectator. I was a witness to the unraveling of her relationship, and I knew this was a turning point for both of us. It was early evening when I heard the sound of her keys rattling in the door. The moment it swung open, I felt a palpable tension in the room. She stepped inside, her shoulders hunched and her gaze directed toward the floor, as if she were carrying the weight of the world on her back. Something was haunting in her demeanor, a stark contrast to the confident woman I had once known. As she crossed the threshold, I noticed the familiar look of anguish etched into her features. Her eyes, once bright with excitement and passion, now appeared dull and clouded, shadowed by the burden of her choices. There was an unmistakable tension in the air, and I could sense that something monumental had transpired. My heart raced as I prepared myself for the confrontation that lay ahead. "Michelle," I said softly, feigning concern, "you look like you've seen a ghost. What happened?" Her response was a heavy silence, punctuated by the soft sound of her breathing as she closed the door behind her. I studied her face closely, searching for any sign of the woman I once adored. Instead, I saw fear and humiliation lurking beneath the surface. It was as if she were wrestling with the ghosts of her past decisions, each one weighing heavier than the last. I think we need to talk," she finally managed, her voice trembling as she looked up to meet my gaze. At that moment, I felt a jolt of electricity course through me. This was it, the moment I had anticipated, the moment that would forever change the course of our lives. I braced myself for what was to come, knowing that beneath her words lay a deeper truth. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. I wanted to draw it out, to savor each syllable, but I couldn't suppress the urgency in my voice. She took a deep breath, and for a moment, I thought I saw the glimmer of the woman I had loved return to her eyes. But it quickly faded, replaced by a mask of vulnerability. "It's over, George," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I can't do this anymore." Those words struck me like a physical blow. I had prepared myself for this moment, yet nothing could have equipped me for the raw pain that washed over me. I watched as her expression shifted, the fear of what she was about to say flickering in her gaze. He's not the man I thought he was. I thought I could count on him, but he's become so desperate and lost. I can't keep pretending everything is okay." As she spoke, I felt a twisted satisfaction rising within me. This was the moment I had envisioned, yet hearing it come from her lips felt like a double-edged sword. I wanted to revel in her realization, to feel triumphant in my revenge, but it was overshadowed by an aching sorrow that I couldn't quite shake. "Michelle," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you sure about this?" I wanted to reach out to her, to comfort her, but the weight of betrayal lingered heavily between us. She seemed so fragile, so lost, and the sight of her pain pierced my heart in ways I hadn't expected. She nodded slowly, her eyes brimming with tears that threatened to spill over. "I thought I could love him. I thought I could have the life I always dreamed of, but now I just feel empty. I feel ashamed." At that moment, I saw the fear that had taken root in her soul. She had sought comfort in the arms of another man, only to find that comfort replaced with dread and regret. It was a bitter irony that echoed through the room. Her ambition had led her down a path that had stripped away not just her lover's identity, but her own as well. "I never wanted it to end like this," she continued, her voice trembling. "I just wanted something more than what we had. I wanted adventure, excitement, and I thought he could give me that. But all I got was disappointment." Tears finally spilled over, cascading down her cheeks as she wiped them away in frustration. Her expression was one of utter humiliation, embarrassment for having been so easily swept away by illusions of grandeur. At that moment, I felt a surge of empathy mixed with the gratification of having watched her realize the futility of her choices. "I thought he could provide for me, but he's just lost everything. And I can't be part of that anymore." Her voice cracked, and I could see the shame swirling in her eyes. It was as if the weight of her choices had come crashing down, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. I took a step closer, not entirely sure what I was doing. "You know you can always come back, Michelle. I've always loved you. We can work through this." But she shook her head, the finality of her decision settling in the air like a heavy fog. "No, George, I have to face this on my own. I've made my bed, and now I have to lie in it." With those words, I felt the air grow thick with loss. The woman I once loved was standing before me, but she was a shadow of her former self, fearful, ashamed, and deeply aware of the path that had led her to this moment. I could see the flicker of hope extinguishing in her eyes, and for the first time, I understood the gravity of what her choices had cost her. As she turned away, the fear etched on her face was haunting. She was breaking down the wall she had built around herself, confronting the emptiness that lay at the center of her heart. I had orchestrated the downfall of her lover, yet here I was, facing the painful truth that I was losing her all over again. At that moment, I realized that this was more than just revenge. It was a profound loss. I had wanted to see him brought low, but I hadn't considered the price it would exact on my own heart. As she stood there, torn between the remnants of a broken relationship and the uncertainty of what lay ahead, I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness wash over me. The woman who had once been my partner, my confidant, was slipping away, and all I could do was watch as she faced the repercussions of her choices alone. The days that followed Michelle's decision were a whirlwind of emotions, a chaotic mix of regret, anger, and an eerie satisfaction. I watched as she struggled to come to terms with the reality she had crafted for herself. The moments we shared became increasingly strained, and I could sense her desperation building. It was as if she were caught in a storm of her own making, struggling to find solid ground in a world that had turned upside down. One evening, just after sunset, I heard a soft knock at the door. My heart raced as I opened it to find Michelle standing there, her eyes puffy from crying. She looked fragile, like a porcelain doll that might shatter at the slightest touch. It was a striking contrast to the woman who had once carried herself with such confidence. I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph as I saw her standing there, a mere shadow of her former self. "George," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken words, and I could feel the tension between us. As she took a seat, I studied her carefully. This was the moment I had anticipated, but it felt different now, like the calm before an impending storm. "I know I hurt you," she began, her voice trembling. "I was selfish, and I made terrible choices. I didn't know how to handle everything. Can you ever forgive Mom?" Her plea hung in the air, a fragile offering laden with remorse. I could see the pain etched into her features, but instead of pity, I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. The woman who had once chosen another over me was now begging for my forgiveness, stripped of the power she had wielded so carelessly. "Forgive you?" I said, my voice steady but laced with disdain. "You left me, Michelle. You walked away from everything we built together. You chose him, and look where it got you." She flinched at my words, the truth cutting deep. "I know, I see that now. But can't we start over? Can't we rebuild what we had?" I leaned back, a bitter smile creeping onto my lips. "What we had? You threw that away for a fantasy, and now you're left with nothing. No man, no dreams, just regret. Why should I open the door to someone who has already left?" Her face fell, and I could see the realization dawning upon her. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, knowing that my refusal to forgive was a mirror reflecting her failures at her. It was painful to see her in such despair, but a part of me reveled in it. This was the outcome I had desired, a reckoning for her betrayal. "I'm not asking for much, George," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I just want a chance to make things right." "But can you?" I countered. "You can't fix what's broken with a simple apology. You shattered our lives, and now you want to put the pieces back together like nothing happened?" She looked down, her hands trembling in her lap. "I know I can't undo the past, but I'm willing to try. I just need you to give me a chance." But the truth was, I didn't want to give her that chance. Watching her lose everything she had built with him brought a sense of closure I never thought I would find. The thrill of her downfall was intoxicating, a validation of my pain and suffering. I felt powerful, and I wasn't ready to relinquish that feeling. "I can't help you," I said coldly. "You made your bed, and now you have to lie in it. You thought you could escape me, escape our life, and chase after something more. But look where that got you, alone and broken." Her expression shifted from desperation to a haunting realization. I watched her mask of hope crumble, leaving behind the raw truth of her circumstances. "I see now that I've lost everything," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "And it's all my fault." "Exactly," I replied, my voice firm. "You wanted to chase after dreams that didn't exist, and now you're left with nothing but ashes. It's painful, I know, but you can't expect me to comfort you in your failure." As she sat there, defeated and humiliated, I felt a strange sense of liberation wash over me. This was the end of our story, a final severing of the ties that had once bound us together. I had emerged from the chaos stronger, more resilient, and most importantly, free from the deceit that had plagued my life for far too long. In the days that followed, I found myself navigating a new landscape, one devoid of the shadows of betrayal that had haunted me for so long. The chaos that had once engulfed my life began to settle, leaving me with a profound sense of clarity. I was no longer the man who had been betrayed. I was a survivor, someone who had emerged from the ashes stronger and more self-aware. As I moved forward, I took the lessons learned from my experience with Michelle to heart. I learned the importance of trust, of honesty, and of standing firm in my principles. I discovered that true strength lies not in revenge but in resilience, the ability to rise above the hurt and build a life that reflects my values. Yet even amidst the newfound clarity, I couldn't shake the remnants of pain that lingered in my soul. The memories of what we once had, the love we had shared, still echoed in the corners of my mind. There were moments when I found myself reminiscing about our past, the laughter we shared, and the dreams we had woven together. But those memories were now tinged with sadness, reminders of what could have been. Despite the scars that remained, I focused on rebuilding my life, surrounding myself with people who truly valued me. I sought out friendships that were built on mutual respect and trust, forging connections that enriched my life rather than drained it. Slowly but surely, I began to reclaim my identity, to rediscover who I was outside of the shadow of betrayal. I immersed myself in my passions, rekindling hobbies and interests that had fallen by the wayside during the tumultuous years with Michelle. I poured my energy into my career, finding fulfillment in my work and establishing a sense of stability that had eluded me for so long. Each small victory felt like a step toward healing, a reminder that I was capable of moving forward. However, deep down, I knew that the wounds would take time to heal. The pain of betrayal had carved a deep chasm in my heart, and while I was determined to move on, I also recognized the importance of acknowledging that pain. It was part of my story, a chapter that had shaped me into the person I was becoming. As I looked ahead, I embraced the idea of forgiveness, not for Michelle, but for myself. I realized that holding on to anger would only weigh me down, preventing me from fully embracing the future. It was a gradual process, but with each passing day, I felt a little lighter, a little freer from the burdens of the past. In the end, I emerged from the ashes of betrayal not as a victim, but as a warrior. I had fought hard to reclaim my life, and while the scars would always remain, they served as a testament to my journey. I had learned to appreciate the value of authenticity and honesty, and though my soul carried wounds, it also carried the strength of resilience. As I closed the chapter on that painful period of my life, I looked forward to the possibilities that lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. I would forge ahead with an open heart, ready to embrace the lessons learned and the growth that had come from the pain. My soul may have been wounded, but it was also stronger, ready to welcome whatever came next.